Okay, so last class we discussed what we're going to be going over today. Well, last week when I last saw you. Okay, so today we're going to be going over the steps of cell respiration. With the substitute, you were supposed to have gone over a couple of things. One of them was a few pages out of your textbook on the process of cell respiration, okay, as well as another ed puzzle, interactive or individual video, okay, to help you get a little bit of review on the ed puzzle, okay, or not on the ed puzzle, excuse me, on cellular respiration. And with that, okay, we're gonna use that information, okay, to go through the process and the steps of cellular respiration today in a little bit more depth and detail, okay? So about a week and a half ago or so, something along those lines, we went over the process of photosynthesis. We talked about the process of photosynthesis with regard to not only the location in which photosynthesis was occurring, okay, so we talked about the organelle within the plant cell as a whole, where photosynthesis was taking place. Then we went ahead and broke it down even further into the different types of chemical reactions that were occurring, okay, in that organelle, which was the chloroplast, right, and how those chemical reactions were combining to form the process of photosynthesis as a whole, okay. We had two main chemical reactions that were occurring in the process of photosynthesis. One of them was light-dependent reactions, and one of them was light-independent reactions, okay. So over the past couple of class periods, last class period and the class period before that, we talked a little bit about cellular respiration and how similar things are occurring in terms of chemical reactions, inputs and outputs, right? But in cellular respiration, there are three main reactions or steps or processes, whichever you'd like to refer as them or refer them to, that are occurring, right? One of them is glycolysis, one of them is the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, and then the other is the electron transport chain, okay? So today, for your warm-up, we had, actually let's start with your learning target. Okay, so your learning target for today is just being able to explain how cells break down glucose to release energy through the three stages of cellular respiration. Okay, so what we just talked about over the past minute or two basically is what we're trying to get to. Okay, so in the process of cellular respiration, we know that glucose is being broken down. Okay, we're breaking glucose down, right? We're releasing energy from the bonds of glucose and then using that to push forward throughout these three stages or these three reactions that are occurring in the process of cellular respiration to turn ultimately that glucose and the energy that is stored within it into the end goal or the end result, which is ATP, right? Which is used to power the different cellular processes or functions that occur in the cells in our bodies, in plant bodies, in animal bodies, right? Okay. So your learning target is being able to explain how cells break this glucose down to release that energy, okay, through those three stages. So I want you all right now to go ahead and write down this learning target for me in your notebooks, okay? It's going to be important, right, especially with cellular respiration. And as we talked about in regards to Unit 2, right, in regards to Unit 2, the two main concepts or the two main goals that we're really trying to reach in Unit 2 are understanding the process of photosynthesis, okay, and understanding the process of cellular respiration, right, and then how those two processes, okay, allow carbon to cycle through Earth's atmosphere, right, through the system, right, carbon in the Earth system, right, is what Unit 2 is titled, and we're talking about primarily photosynthesis and cellular respiration and how that carbon cycles through these two processes in and out of plant bodies and in and out of animal bodies, okay, or human bodies, to give us the inputs and outputs that we need to have the energy required for our daily processes, right? So I'll give you a few seconds to write that down, okay? And again, in Ed Puzzle, you know we do two different types of Ed Puzzles in this class. The primary one that we do is where I'm up here at the front of the class. We have slides that are uploaded onto Ed Puzzle. We go through each slide. We have some questions at the end of some of these slides, right, for retention or for memorization or just understanding of the concepts, right? The other types of ed puzzles that we do individually, when I assign them to you, maybe we have a substitute, or there's an extra assignment that I'd like to give you, are usually video based, right? You've done a couple of those in this class already, okay? They're not as common, but they are meant to serve a purpose, right? So last class, if you went through that ed puzzle video, okay, it's gonna make today a little bit easier to understand, just in terms of what we're going over, okay? So your 10-minute warm-up was just, how does carbon move from the atmosphere to our bodies? So who has a talking stick, please raise it loud or high, clear for me so I can see. So Marlene, can you answer this question for us? In 2 to 3 sentences, right, how does carbon move from atmosphere, or from the atmosphere to our bodies? We're looking at the chemical equation, or the chemical process of cellular respiration. We have our 2 inputs and our 3 outputs, okay? And then just some of these key terms that you could have used in those couple of sentences to describe an answer to this.
I wasn't here last class.
It's okay, try your best. So think about the process of photosynthesis, what goes into photosynthesis and what comes out, right? And then think about the process of cellular respiration, what goes into cellular respiration and what comes out of it.
I have no idea.
No idea? Who wants to help Marlene out? Alonso?
I think we use like plants transfer energy to our bodies, and so we release the oxygen to the plants, so it's like a cycle.
Okay, so what is going into the process of photosynthesis?
Glucose.
Not glucose, what's going in and then what's coming out?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide is going into the process of photosynthesis along with sunlight and some other things, right? And then glucose is coming out, right? And then glucose, on the other hand, is going into the process of cellular respiration, okay? And then what is coming out of the process of cellular respiration is energy, or ATP, right? And that's what's used to power the cellular activities, not only in plant cells, but animal cells and human cells, okay? So this question here, how does carbon move from the atmosphere to our bodies, is one of the key questions that you're gonna have to be able to understand and answer to be successful in this class, right? So when you have an exam or a quiz, okay, if you wanna be successful in this unit, okay, at the end of this semester, you're going to have to be able to answer this question, right? And simply put, the cycling of carbon or the cycling of matter through the Earth system, right, or the atmosphere through our bodies is carbon movement, right? So carbon moves from the atmosphere into our bodies because plants absorb carbon dioxide, they use it to produce energy in the form of glucose. We break that glucose down when we eat plants, okay? And then that glucose is used to produce ATP, okay? And that's the energy that is given to you, that is stored in your bodies or used immediately in most cases. To sit here and listen to me talk about carbon dioxide, cellular respiration, and photosynthesis, to get up and out of your chair, to walk to your next class, to eat the food and walk to school in the morning, the things that you do every single day, okay? The cycling of this matter, the cycling of this carbon through our atmosphere is actually what gives you the ability to do that, okay? So again, Marlene, for instance, if you are having trouble answering this question, then please make sure that you are doing the warm-up appropriately instead of being on your phone and talking during class time. Is that understood?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have some vocabulary terms for you. One of them is aerobic, okay, a process that requires oxygen to take place, okay? So there are 2 types of respiration that occurs in our bodies and animal bodies particularly, okay? One of them is aerobic respiration, again, requiring oxygen, okay? Another one is anaerobic respiration, which is a process that does not require oxygen to take place, okay? Those 2 processes, or those 2 types of respiration, okay? One being aerobic and one being anaerobic. Aerobic is the primary source of energy, or the primary producer of energy that we utilize in our body, right? So we're inhaling oxygen, we're exhaling carbon dioxide. When we inhale that oxygen, we're moving that oxygen through our bloodstream, and then that oxygen diffuses into our cells, and then our cells use that oxygen along with the glucose that we've consumed, okay, to produce ATP in the process of cellular respiration, right? So that's our primary source of energy, is usually through aerobic respiration and breaking down that glucose with oxygen in conjunction to give us massive amounts of ATP in comparison to something that we call anaerobic respiration, okay? Anaerobic respiration is a process that does not require oxygen to take place, and there are uses for both, okay? In many instances, anaerobic respiration is still used, but it is not a primary source of ATP or energy production in our bodies, okay? Anaerobic respiration in particular is usually used for short bursts of energy, in instances where we might have a little to no or just a lack of oxygen, right? So in many instances, we do use anaerobic respiration. It's just not something that's the primary source of energy production in our body, okay? But it does have its uses, and it does have some positive benefits too, okay? Our other two vocabulary terms are mitochondria and cytoplasm. We've talked about these two terms before. We've gone over the organelles, the structures, and the functions of each one of the organelles in plant and animal cells. Okay, plant and animal cells both have mitochondria and they both have cytoplasm. Okay, mitochondria again is just the organelle where cellular respiration takes place. Okay, it's responsible for the release of energy required to make ATP. Okay, we've talked about the mitochondria before, otherwise known as the powerhouse of the cell. Okay. The other organelle that we're going to talk a little bit about today, the one that we know a lot about already, is the jelly-like liquid inside of a cell that holds all the tiny cell parts or those organelles in place, right? And this is otherwise known as the cytoplasm, right? So the inner filling of these cells is also known as the cytoplasm. It's where all of these different organelles within animal and plant cells are stratified, okay, or supported, and kind of hanging around there in their particular areas inside of these cells, okay? So 4 vocabulary terms for today, 4 vocabulary terms that are going to be a little bit important as we move through these slides. All right. So I have some questions for you. These are vocabulary-based questions, and you got some time to answer them. So go ahead, read the question, and give me the best answer. So, an organelle where cellular respiration takes place and is responsible for the release of energy required to make ATP. Okay, we just reviewed this, otherwise known as the mitochondria. Okay, so please remember this: the powerhouse of the cell is the mitochondria. Okay, the organelle within animal and plant cells, responsible for the production of energy for our cellular activities. Okay. Next question. Okay, a process that does not require oxygen to take place. Again, for these shorter questions that are multiple choice, I usually give you about 20 seconds, so try to answer them, even if you don't know the correct answer right off the top of your head, okay, or maybe you weren't paying attention to that slide prior to it. Just give your best answer. Some points are better than no points, right? So the process that does not require oxygen to take place, otherwise known as anaerobic respiration. So aerobic and anaerobic, okay? Anaerobic again, meaning no oxygen is required or present. Your next question here. A process that requires oxygen to take place, okay? Again, aerobic respiration requiring oxygen to occur. Okay, anaerobic does not require. Anaerobic does require oxygen. Okay. Last question here for the vocabulary terms. Okay, the key terms for today. The jelly-like liquid inside a cell that holds all the tiny cell parts, called organelles. Okay, in place. So we know what this organelle is called. It's the cytoplasm. Okay. Again, that jelly-like liquid that stratifies these or holds up these organelles within the cell. Okay. So moving on. So today's main theme is the process of cellular respiration. Okay. More particularly, the 3 steps of the process of cellular respiration. Some of these slides prior to those 3 steps are going to be a little bit of a review or a refresher. But leading up to those steps of the process are important to go over, right? Just because of the fact that they rely on these particular themes or these particular topics, okay, to occur. So cellular respiration, who has a talking stick? Someone besides Alonso. Valeria, will you go ahead and tell us what cellular respiration is, please?
Are you good?
Yeah, read up here, or wherever, if you have it on here.
Cellular respiration is the process by which cells convert glucose, sugar into energy. This energy is stored in a molecule called ATP, which powers various cellular activities. There are two main types of respiration, aerobic and anaerobic.
Thank you, Valeria, that's good. So, cellular respiration is the process by which cells convert glucose or sugar into energy. Okay, yes, Melanie? Huh? You don't have a talking stick? There's 8 of them and they're supposed to be passed around. Okay. So after Alonzo answers, he can pass it back to Steve. Okay. But if you do want to answer, just raise your hand. Okay. So again, cellular respiration is a process by which cells convert glucose or sugar into energy. Okay. This energy is stored in a molecule otherwise known as ATP. Okay. Leading up to this particular lesson today, we've talked a lot about ATP. We've talked a lot about ADP. Okay, we have 2 different forms of this as an electron carrier, primarily that phosphate or that extra phosphate group. Okay, we have ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. Okay, and we have ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. Di meaning 2, tri meaning 3. Okay, ADP has 2 phosphate groups, ATP has 3 phosphate. Okay, we can take ATP, we can break one of those phosphate groups off. That gives us an exothermic reaction, meaning there's a release of energy, and then we're using that energy that's released from the ATP molecule, again, to power our cellular activity. Okay. This equation here, right, the process of cellular respiration, and this equation in particular, okay, is one that you're going to have to know leading up to your quizzes and your exams. You will have a quiz today, okay, just so you're aware. Again, any of the questions on the quiz that you take today will be directly related to what we review in these slides. Yes, I know. You may. You're always able to use your notebooks. Okay. Again, in this class, I always allow you to use your notebooks to take my quizzes and exams. Does that necessarily mean that your notebook's going to get you at 100%? No. But taking effective and good notes is not only key in this class, but any other class that you take throughout your lifetime. Okay. Some of my questions are more open-ended. They're not necessarily all multiple choice, right? But if you do take effective notes on these slides and pay attention, I can guarantee you will pass my exam with a passing grade. Any questions about that? So go ahead and answer this question for me, okay? Tell me the 2 main types of respiration that occur in animal or human cells. 2 main types of respiration. So your 2 main types of respiration, again, aerobic and anaerobic. Okay? Can anybody tell me in this class what the process of cellular respiration is? Is cellular respiration an aerobic process or an anaerobic process? Who has a talking stick? Alonso, what do you think?
I think it's an anaerobic.
Aerobic?
Anaerobic.
Anaerobic? Why do you think it's anaerobic?
Because it has 3 steps.
Because it has 3 steps? So what's the difference between anaerobic and aerobic?
One requires oxygen and the other one does not.
So if you look at the chemical equation in the process of cellular respiration, what is one of the inputs? What's going into the chemical equation? What's on the left-hand side of that equation?
Oxygen.
Oxygen, right? So that would make cellular respiration aerobic, right? So cellular respiration is an aerobic process, right? Because it requires oxygen to occur. So if I look at that chemical equation in the process of cellular respiration, and I see oxygen going in to that reaction, okay, that means that it must require oxygen to occur, okay, which would make it aerobic, okay? If it did not require oxygen to occur, then it would be anaerobic, okay? So I can always look at those chemical equations, whether it's in this class, chemistry class, right? Or moving forward in anatomy and physiology, or AP environmental science, right? And I can take these chemical equations, and you can break them down, and understand the inputs and the outputs, right? Reacting to form what? So if I'm asking you what the difference between an aerobic and an anaerobic reaction is, or process of respiration, okay, you need to be able to look at that particular equation and understand what's going into it and what's coming out of it. All right, so if oxygen is going into the equation, then that means it must require oxygen to occur. If I took that oxygen out, then it's not going to be able to react to form it. Okay. So let's have Valeria, or not Valeria, Fatima, go ahead and read this for me here. The whole slide.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Aerobic respiration requires oxygen to produce energy. Do I read that one real quick?
the whole slide.
When does oxygen produce air
Reacts to form.
reacts to form carbon dioxide plus water plus energy ATP? Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm where glucose is broken down into how do you say it?
Pyruvate.
Pyruvate, producing a small amount of ATP. How do you say that?
Krebs.
Krebs cycles takes place in the mitochondria where pyruvate is further broken down, releasing carbon dioxide and transferring energy into electron carriers. Electron transport chains, also in mitochondria where energy and electron carriers is used to produce a large amount of ATP. Products, the main product of carbon dioxide, water, and a significant amount of ATP, about 36 to 38 ATP molecules per glucose molecule. Examples of organisms: most animals, plants, and many microorganisms use aerobic respiration.
Thank you, Fatima. So, aerobic respiration, all right, requires oxygen to produce energy. One of the main processes of aerobic respiration in our bodies is the process of cellular respiration. Okay, it is an aerobic process. It requires oxygen. As you can see in the chemical equation, this is a simplified chemical equation, but I have glucose and oxygen, okay, on my reactant side, all right, and on my product side, I have CO2, water, and energy, or ATP, okay. Again, if I take oxygen out of this equation, all right, and I just have glucose, there's no ability for my body to break this down as an aerobic process. It cannot go through the remainder of these steps, okay? It might be able to get through glycolysis, but it will not be able to get through Krebs or the electron transport, okay? So the three different steps of aerobic respiration in our bodies, plant bodies, animal bodies, okay? Again, glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. I simplified these steps for you as much as I can, okay? But again, there's only so much simplifying I can do for you, all right? And I can guarantee you that this process will resurface for you, whether it's in this class or your next science class, okay? Anybody know how many years of science you need to graduate from Brawley Union High School? Two. How many years of science you need to go to a four-year university? 3, yeah, minimum, okay? So, again, whether you're here, whether you're at a junior college, or whether you're in a university setting, okay, this particular process of cellular respiration in any science class you take, primarily biology and chemistry, or again, anatomy and phys, etc., is going to resurface, okay? So if you learn it now, it'll make it a lot easier for you in the long run, all right? But again, you don't have to take my word for it if you choose. So again, glycolysis, Krebs, and electron transport chain. All right, glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm. This is where glucose is broken down into a couple of outputs, okay? Pyruvate and a small amount of ATP. So we talked about similar types of things occurring in the process of photosynthesis. My light independent, or my light dependent and my light independent reactions, okay? They had inputs and they had outputs, okay? So each reaction had particular inputs that were going into that reaction, and each reaction had particular outputs that were being produced. Okay, the same thing is happening here with glycolysis, Krebs, and the electron transport chain. Okay, I have particular inputs going into glycolysis. These are going to be glucose, and they are producing pyruvate and a small amount of ATP. Okay, as we learned about in some of our previous lessons, we do require small amounts of ATP to push these steps forward, right, or for these steps to occur. There's usually a net reaction, meaning that some amount of ATP is produced afterwards, okay? But I need a little bit of energy for the process of glycolysis or Krebs to actually move forward and make it happen, okay? So my Krebs cycle process, or the step of the Krebs cycle, takes place in the mitochondria, right? So if you notice, there is a shifting, just like we talked about in photosynthesis, the light-dependent reactions are occurring in the thylakoids, okay? The light-independent reactions are occurring in the stroma, just outside of those thylakoids, okay? In the process of cell respiration, it's actually kind of flipped, right? So the stroma within those chloroplasts is very similar to the cytoplasm inside of a cell, okay? It's that inner jelly-like substance, okay? In this particular instance, glycolysis is occurring in the cytoplasm, okay, just outside of the mitochondria. The Krebs cycle is actually occurring within the mitochondria. So when glycolysis moves forward and produces pyruvate and ATP, those outputs move in to the mitochondria and are able to begin the process of the Krebs cycle, okay? Pyruvate is broken down further, it releases some CO2, okay? And it transfers energy to some electron carriers. We talked about some electron carriers in photosynthesis as well. One of them was NADPH, okay? And NADH, right? And then today we're gonna talk a little bit about FADH as well. Okay, these are just electron carriers that are used to carry electrons for the transfer of energy, okay? Then we have our electron transport chain, which is also in the mitochondria, and it's where energy from those electron carriers is used to produce a larger amount of ATP. Okay, so the ultimate goal is to get to the electron transport chain, because that is where the bulk of the ATP is being produced, okay? In the electron transport chain, I can have anywhere from 28 to 32 to 34 ATP molecules being produced, okay? Which seems insignificant, but when you think about the number of cells that you have in your body, and then you multiply that by the number of ATP that are being produced per cell, at the speed in which these ATP are being produced, you'll begin to understand how much energy your body is actually producing on a massive scale, okay? The products, again, the main products are carbon dioxide, water, and a significant amount of ATP, okay? So again, we inhale oxygen, we exhale CO2, okay? Water is another byproduct, ATP is the main product of the process of cell respiration, okay? And we know where these occur, animals, plants, humans, okay? So no need to review that. So go ahead and answer these questions for me, okay? So the three steps of the process of cell respiration, in order: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain, okay? They all rely on one another, meaning that inputs that are going into glycolysis have outputs, right? So outputs from glycolysis go into the Krebs cycle as inputs. The Krebs cycle produces outputs that go in as inputs to the electron transport chain, okay? So without those inputs and outputs at every stage, all right, the next stage would not be allowed to occur or move forward, okay? So now we have aerobic respiration, or anaerobic respiration, excuse me. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on anaerobic respiration, okay, but it's good to know briefly, at least for the context of today, just so you can really understand the difference between the two, all right? So let's have Santiago, go ahead and read this slide for us.
Definition. Anaerobic respiration occurs without oxygen and produces energy through different processes. Chemical equation, glucose, how do I say the other?
Lactic acid.
Lactic acid plus energy. For alcoholic fermentation, glucose, ethanol, plus carbon dioxide plus energy. Steps like glycolysis, similar to aerobic respiration, glucose is broken down into pyruvate. In the absence of oxygen, pyruvate is converted into either lactic acid or ethanol and carbon dioxide in yeast and some plants. The main products are lactic acid in animals or ethanol and carbon dioxide in yeast, along with smaller amount of ATP, about 2 ATP molecules per glucose molecule. Examples of organisms: yeast, which performs alcoholic fermentation, and muscle cells in animals which can perform lactic acid and fermentation.
Very good. Thank you, Santiago. So anaerobic respiration does not require oxygen to occur, but there is still energy production that is occurring. Okay. Again, without that oxygen, there are two different types of anaerobic respiration that occur. One of them is lactic acid fermentation, and one of them is alcoholic fermentation. Okay. These are processes that you're familiar with without realizing it. Just because you don't know the scientific term does not mean that you haven't experienced it. Right? Lactic acid fermentation, for instance, okay, when maybe you go on a run or you worked out at PE or maybe a particular type of sport, and your muscles start to feel sore the next day, right? That's otherwise known as a lactic acid buildup or a buildup of lactic acid, meaning that lactic acid has built up in your muscles due to the fact, right, that you have done something in particular that has required short bursts of energy. Maybe you were running, maybe you were weightlifting or biking or something like that, right? And the next day your muscles are sore. That means that you required an excess amount of energy than you could actually produce during aerobic respiration, meaning you were not able to breathe in enough oxygen fast enough to produce enough energy to give you the amount of energy you needed to lift those weights or do that run, right? So your body had to resort or supplement with anaerobic respiration, okay? Meaning that it took the glucose in your body, and to give you energy for those short bursts of weightlifting or running or biking or whatever you did that made you sore, right? It took that glucose and it broke it down in the first step of glycolysis, okay? And it produced instead lactic acid and energy immediately for you, right? So it was only producing maybe 2 to 4 ATP molecules for you in that process of glycolysis, right? And in that process of glycolysis, it was able to redo that step enough times to give you the amount of energy you needed to lift those weights or run or bike, right? Whatever you were doing that made you sore. Another byproduct of that is lactic acid, right? So you feel sore the next day because lactic acid builds up in your muscles, right? And it creates that soreness or that feeling of soreness that you have that usually takes a couple of days to go away, right? And we can talk more about the actual effects of lactic acid at another time. But there's also something otherwise known as alcoholic fermentation, right? Where we break down glucose into ethanol, carbon dioxide, and energy, right? This also occurs in plants, and I'm sure that you've heard about this in other instances. When people make sourdough bread, for instance, usually they put yeast into their sourdough bread, they feed it, right? And then they close the lid, they cut off the oxygen to that sourdough bread, and then it starts to bubble and grow, right? That is a form of alcoholic fermentation with yeast, okay? There's also other processes of alcoholic fermentation that are used to, produce different types of alcohol that people consume as well. And these are just processes that are used to create small amounts of energy for the particular yeast molecules or organisms to grow, okay? So again, we're not gonna spend a lot of time on anaerobic respiration, but just understanding the difference between the two is pretty important when looking at cellular respiration, right? So we know that anaerobic respiration still produces ATP without oxygen, but it's in super small amounts and it's only in specific types of cases, okay? So go ahead and answer these questions for me. What is the only step of anaerobic respiration? So again, 3 steps in the process of aerobic or cellular, okay? And 1 step in anaerobic. So again, the only step that's occurring in anaerobic respiration is glycolysis, whether it's lactic acid or alcoholic fermentation, okay? Glycolysis is the only step occurring. That's what makes glycolysis so unique, is that it can transition between aerobic and anaerobic respiration in our bodies, okay? Since it's occurring in the cytoplasm and not in the mitochondria, its ability to transition between different types of energy production makes the step or the process of glycolysis very unique, okay? So just some examples of aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration, jogging, swimming, bike riding, right? These things that are kind of slow paced but give you the ability to breathe or inhale and exhale enough oxygen and carbon dioxide to give your body the ability to produce ATP aerobically, right? And then there's forms of anaerobic respiration which require short bursts of energy immediately, like sprinting, weightlifting, high jumping, right? Stuff where you might not be able to inhale enough oxygen fast enough in that moment or in that duration of time. So your body resorts to a different type of energy production, which is usually lactic acid fermentation. Okay? So the key differences between the two is important, all right? And there are key differences between the two, not only applied to classes like biology and chemistry, but exercise science, kinesiology, sports medicine, stuff like that, okay? So aerobic and anaerobic types of activities are important, okay? The differences, again, between the two. So I have the feature, right? Oxygen requirements, the location, the main products, the yield of ATP, and then the organisms they occur in, okay? And I have aerobic and anaerobic respiration, okay? So my aerobic respiration requires oxygen. Anaerobic respiration does not require oxygen, okay? Aerobic respiration occurs in the cytoplasm and in the mitochondria. Okay, glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, but Krebs and the ETC, or the electron transport chain, occurs in the mitochondria. Okay, in anaerobic respiration, cytoplasm is the only place that it occurs because glycolysis is the only step that is actually occurring. Okay, the main products, again, CO2, H2O, and ATP are the main products of aerobic respiration. And depending on the type of anaerobic respiration that's occurring, I can have products in the form of lactic acid and ATP or ethanol and ATP. Okay. And then your ATP yields, you can see the difference, right? 36 to 38 ATP molecules produced in aerobic respiration compared to usually only 2 ATP molecules produced in anaerobic respiration. Okay, it's super, super low, okay? But it is still useful in certain instances, all right? And then this both occurs usually in humans and animals, bacteria, yeast, and mussels, right? So when we say mussels, that's still occurring in animals and humans, right? But it's usually for particular or specific types of instances like we talked about, for short bursts of energy, okay? Which is why we tend to get really, really sore, especially when we haven't weightlifted or ran or sprinted in quite a while, okay? I got another question for you. So what input is used in both aerobic and anaerobic respiration? So remember the stage or the process that is occurring in each, right? And what would that input be for that particular stage? Okay. So if you put glucose, you were correct. Okay, if you did not, it's okay. I do not expect you to memorize all this on the fly. Okay, but again, the input that is used in both aerobic and anaerobic is glucose, right? The only stage occurring in anaerobic respiration is glycolysis, right? Meaning that both of those stages, when they occur in either process, anaerobic or aerobic, are going to need glucose as an input, okay? The other input in the process of cellular respiration is oxygen, but there is no oxygen as an input in anaerobic respiration, okay? Another question for you. So what output is produced in both aerobic and anaerobic? So if you answered ATP, you are correct. Okay, ATP is produced in both of these types of respiration. All right, and again, this circles back to glucose and ATP. Okay, using glucose to produce ATP, whether it's in aerobic or anaerobic respiration. Okay, and we get glucose again from plants, process of cellular or process of photosynthesis. Okay, so again, that cycle in that. So I'm gonna breeze through these slides real quick, okay? So what is the cytoplasm? We know what the cytoplasm is. We've talked about the cytoplasm, but primarily, what is occurring in the cytoplasm? So the first step of cellular respiration, which is glycolysis, is occurring in the cytoplasm. Okay, that is the main thing I want you to take away from this slide. When I ask you a question on a quiz or an exam, and I say, where does glycolysis occur? You need to be able to know that it is occurring in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay? We can talk a little bit more about the initial energy investment and the transition to mitochondria in our next slides. But again, what is the cytoplasm? You know what the cytoplasm is, and please just understand at the very least that the process of glycolysis, or step 1 of cellular respiration, is occurring in the cytoplasm. Okay? So again, glycolysis, all right, that is the step of cellular arrest, but it's occurring in the cytoplasm. Okay? Same thing with this slide. What is the mitochondria? We know what the mitochondria is. It's known as the powerhouse of the cell because they produce the majority of the ATP for our bodies, for our cells, okay, or our cellular activities, excuse me. Okay? What you really need to understand about this particular slide, okay, we'll go into a little bit more detail on the mitochondria in the next slide, but it is the organelle that houses the last 2 stages of cellular respiration. Okay? It's the location of the Krebs cycle, and it is the location of the electron transport chain. Okay, so in the mitochondria in particular, okay, we have a lot of different characteristics in terms of the structure of the mitochondria. Okay, it's a very unique type of organelle, all right, and we have a lot of different things. We have our outer membrane, we have our inner membrane, we have the matrix, we have something called the cristae, and then we also have something called the transmembrane space. Okay, we're not going to go into detail on all of those today, but we are going to talk about the specific locations in the mitochondria of that Krebs cycle and electron transport chain occurring. Okay, so please, from this particular slide, what you need to understand is that the Krebs cycle, which is step 2 of cellular respiration, and the electron transport chain, which is step 3, occurs within the mitochondria. Okay, not in the cytoplasm, but within the mitochondria. So which step of cellular respiration is located in the mitochondria? Okay. So again, if you answered both of these, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, you were correct. All right. And again, these are the 2 steps that are occurring within the mitochondria. Okay. So this is just a little overview or a diagram of the actual process of cellular respiration. Again, as simplified as I can get it for you. Really, it is a lot more complicated. Once you move on to higher biology or science classes, you'll learn that. But again, within the context of this class, this is really all you need to know. Okay, I have glycolysis. Okay, so here's the cytoplasm in white. Okay, I have glycolysis, and I have my glucose or my sugar molecules coming into the process or the step or stage of glycolysis. Okay, in glycolysis, we are also requiring 2 ATP molecules. Okay, 2 ATP molecules to get glycolysis up off the ground and running. Okay, or to start the engine of the process. Okay, so I have glucose coming in, I have ATP coming in, and what's being produced is 4 ATP, which is a net production of 2 ATP molecules. Okay, what's also being produced on the back end is 2 NADH molecules, which are electron carriers. Okay, we talked about this before. NADH and FADH, they carry electrons to provide energy for these steps in cellular respiration. Okay. After that, glycolysis produces pyruvate as well. Okay, so those 2 pyruvate molecules. These 2 pyruvate molecules are coming directly into the Krebs cycle, as well as the oxygen that we're inhaling. Okay, so when I inhale this oxygen, it's coming directly into the Krebs cycle, which makes a lot of sense when you think about the process of anaerobic respiration, right? Meaning that it does not require oxygen. That is the reason that glycolysis is still able to occur to produce some, even though they are small amounts of ATP. So the Krebs cycle takes oxygen and pyruvate as inputs, okay, and it uses those to produce a little bit more ATP, as well as some electron carriers and some carbon dioxide. Okay, so I'm producing 8 NADPH, 2 FADH2, okay, and 6 CO2 molecules. Okay. These vary, okay? In particular, the NADH and the FADH2 and the CO2, those numbers on those molecules do vary, okay? So they are not always accurate. Similar to the production of ATP, we're not always necessarily producing 36 ATP molecules. Okay, you'll find different numbers in different textbooks and stuff like that. But again, trying to simplify it for you as much as possible. The electron transport chain then takes as inputs the two NADPH molecule or two NADH molecules, okay, as well as all of these outputs here, right? So I'm taking ATP, CO2, all these electron carriers, NADH and FADH2 that are coming out of the Krebs cycle, okay? And we're using that in the electron transport chain, right, to release energy from these electron carriers, right? NADH, FADH2, they're electron carriers, right? So when I break bonds within those particular molecules, they produce an exothermic reaction releasing energy, okay? And that allows the electron transport chain to produce my 34 or 32 to 34 ATP molecules, okay, and some water, all right? So this diagram is something you're gonna get familiar with here pretty shortly, okay? But we'll come back to it in a couple of slides. Okay. So step one is glycolysis. Okay, we've talked a lot about this already. It's an anaerobic process, meaning it does not require oxygen. That's why you can perform glycolysis anaerobically or aerobically. Okay, its location is within the cytoplasm. Okay, so just outside of the mitochondria. And glucose, which is a sugar molecule, is broken down into two molecules of pyruvate. Okay, and this process also uses ATP to actually get it up off the ground and work. Okay, so what you really need to take away from this slide today, right, I don't expect you to memorize all these particular steps and inputs and outputs, but what you really need to understand is what's going in to glycolysis and what's coming out of glycolysis. Okay, the inputs and the outputs. We'll hash the rest out over the next couple of classes, but in the process of glycolysis, I have two ATP molecules and a glucose molecule going in, okay, as my inputs, and then two ATP molecules, two NADH molecules, and two pyruvate molecules coming out as outputs, okay? So go ahead and answer this question for me. What are the inputs of glycolysis? So again, your inputs in the process of glycolysis, it is an anaerobic process, it does not require oxygen, okay? Two ATP and a glucose molecule. Okay, these are the inputs of glycolysis, this is always going to be true, okay? Your next question, talking about the outputs, what are the outputs of glycolysis, okay? Some of these questions moving forward are going to get a little trickier just because we're talking about the inputs and outputs of each stage, okay? You're not always going to be able to remember all of them, that's okay. All right, we're going to work on that here shortly, okay? So the outputs of glycolysis, I have two ATP or net ATP, two pyruvate, and two NADPH, all right? So the Krebs cycle, okay? The Krebs cycle, also otherwise known as the citric acid cycle, okay? And it is an aerobic process, meaning that it does require oxygen, okay? You must have oxygen for the Krebs cycle to move forward, meaning that if you are not in the presence of oxygen, your body is just going to continue to repeat the process of glycolysis, which is where lactic acid or alcoholic fermentation occurs.
Call 4092.
Call 4092?
Yeah.
Yes.
Dolores. Thank you.
So please look at the inputs and the outputs of the Krebs cycle. We have oxygen and pyruvate coming in. Hi Dolores, this is Mr. Guler. I'm just giving you a call back. Uh-huh. Yes. Uh-huh. Okay, yeah, I'll send her over. Okay. Thank you. So please here, look at the inputs and the outputs of the Krebs cycle, okay? My inputs of the Krebs cycle are oxygen and pyruvate, okay? Those are the two molecules coming into the Krebs cycle process, okay? And I have 4 outputs, okay? It's a lot of outputs. I have some CO2 coming out, okay? I have some NADH, some FADH2, and some ATP, okay? Most of these steps are all producing ATP, as you can tell, glycolysis, Krebs, electron transport chain are all producing ATP, albeit the electron transport chain is where the majority of that ATP is being produced, okay? Any questions about this step? No? Okay, so we are gonna break these steps down a little bit more, but today, we're getting a pretty decent introduction to them, but again, I'm trying to simplify it for you as much as possible, okay? Go ahead and answer this question for me. So what is the location of the Krebs cycle? So where is the Krebs cycle occurring, right? Glycolysis is occurring in the cytoplasm, okay?
We have to uppercase the Krebs cycle.
Oh, you don't necessarily have to. Got about 20 seconds, okay? Sure you should know what you have. Very good. So what is the location of the Krebs cycle? Who can tell me? Bailey?
The mitochondria.
The mitochondria. Can you go back to that slide for me? On the Krebs cycle?
Mitochondrial matrix.
The mitochondrial matrix. So mitochondria is fine, but the mitochondrial matrix is actually where the Krebs cycle is particularly occurring. Okay. I have another question for you. If you didn't have enough time, it's okay. You will not be Dr. Points, do not worry. The inputs of the Krebs cycle, okay?
What the?
They are pyruvate and they are oxygen, okay? So the inputs of the Krebs cycle, pyruvate and oxygen, do not worry. That puzzle just kind of keeps moving forward, okay? Okay, what are the outputs of the Krebs cycle? Remember, there's 4 of them, okay? There are 4 outputs.
Oh,
So NADH, ATP, FADH2, and carbon dioxide or CO2. Okay, these are all outputs of the Krebs cycle. Again, we'll become more familiar with these, okay, as we work on them. So please do not be too worried if you're still kind of struggling to memorize those particular inputs and outputs. Okay, I have some stuff for you that'll help. Yeah, and this slide, I don't know what's going on. Oh, there we go. So the electron transport chain. So the location of the electron transport chain is in the mitochondria, but it's in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Okay, excuse me. So the inner mitochondrial membrane is the specific location within the mitochondria that the electron transport chain is occurring. Okay, so please make sure to write that down. Your inputs, right? NADH, FADH2, and oxygen. So the same outputs that are coming from my Krebs cycle, okay, are going directly into the electron transport chain. Okay, and then my outputs in the electron transport chain. This is where things get super interesting as we start to break it down. But to put it as simply as possible, the main outputs are ATP, okay, which is produced through something called chemiosmosis, all right, that we talked about over the past couple of classes, all right, as well as water, which is formed when electrons combine with oxygen and protons. Okay, so those electron carriers, NADH and FADH2, okay, those electron carriers that are bringing energy into the electron transport chain allow these particular molecules of water to be formed. Okay, what's up, Rudy?
Hey, can I borrow a Chromebook?
Yeah, you can borrow from me.
I'll bring you back there in 6th period.
That's fine. So again, remember these inputs and remember these outputs. I have 3 inputs and I have 2 outputs. The primary output again, okay, is ATP. In this particular case, this is where the majority of our ATP is being produced. Okay, location of the ETC is in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Okay. Go ahead and answer this question for me. What is the location of the electron transport chain? As you're doing this, I'm going to hand everybody a sheet of paper here. It's a blank sheet of paper. Just hold on to it. Don't bend it or anything like that. I'll tell you what you're going to do with it, okay? Okay, so the location of the electron transport chain, who could answer that one for me? Brianna?
The inner mitochondrial membrane.
The inner mitochondrial membrane, very good, thank you. Okay, last 2 questions, and then we're done with these slides for today. Okay, what are the inputs of the electron transport chain? Remember, there are 3 of them. They're coming directly from the Krebs cycle. Okay. So oxygen, NADH, and FADH2. Okay. And your last question for today, or at least in the context of the slides, what are the outputs of the electron transport chain? Okay. So the outputs are ATP and water. Okay, those are the 2 products of the electron transport chain. So again, this diagram, resurfacing, right? This diagram shows the simplified process of cellular respiration. Okay, so I have something for you all to do today, similar to what we did with photosynthesis. We drew a diagram of the process of photosynthesis. We labeled it, we colored it, all right, and things of that sort. This process of cellular respiration is a little bit more complex, right? More inputs, more outputs, an extra stage, right? There's a lot going on, all right? So what we're going to do today is we're going to create another diagram on the sheet of paper that I gave you. Okay, so on this sheet of paper, you're going to create a trifold or a 3-fold. Okay, so you're going to take your paper this way. You're going to fold 1/3 of the paper in. You're going to go ahead and seal that side off. Okay, and then what you can do is do the same thing to the other side. Fold that other side in, or that other third, and seal that off. Okay, doesn't need to be perfect, don't worry. But what I want you to do is I want you to have a 3-fold or a trifold on your paper that looks just like this up here at the front of the class, okay? Now what you're going to do is on this trifold, you are going to redraw the entire process of cellular respiration, okay? So you're gonna start out here in the cytoplasm, in the process of glycolysis, or the stage of glycolysis. You're going to label the cytoplasm, you're going to label glycolysis, the inputs, the outputs, you're going to color them, all right? And then on these other 2, you're going to start onto the next stages. So the middle stage is going to be your Krebs cycle, and the far side is going to be your electron transport chain. So remember, this is the cytoplasm, but on these 2 particular parts of the fold, you're actually going to have your mitochondria. So you're going to have to first draw your mitochondria, okay? And then you can put in your Krebs cycle and your electron transport chain. Okay, remember, all of these steps need to be labeled, okay? Your mitochondria and your cytoplasm needs to be labeled. Your inputs and your outputs all need to be labeled with arrows pointing in and out. and they all need to be color coded. Okay, meaning that you need to make sure to color each one of the different types of inputs, outputs, and sections of the organelles. Yes. No.
How many questions this week?
5.
When is it today?
This is not due today, but we're gonna start working on it now. Okay? So don't worry about the quiz at this moment, just worry about this, okay? And again, all the colored pencils are up here at the front. Your diagrams are on your slides if you need them, okay? And again, the trifold is what you're doing. So what's the idea behind this is you're gonna be able to fold this side and this side in, okay? And you're gonna be able to open up one side and study or view the process of glycolysis, the inputs and the outputs that are occurring, okay? And then you're going to be able to open up the other side, right, and look at the process of the Krebs cycle, okay? You can even fold this backwards if you'd like, and you can study primarily the Krebs cycle, okay? And then you can go ahead and use it to study and look at just the electron transport chain. Okay, so this is going to be a tool for you to learn and understand a little bit more about the process of cellular respiration, but also to help you study in preparation for your quizzes and exams on the process of cellular respiration as well. Okay, remember, the more you put into this diagram, the more details you make it, the easier it's going to be for you. Okay, remember, glycolysis is an anaerobic process. Krebs and electron transport chain are aerobic processes. Okay, so the more creative and detailed you get with this, the better. Any questions?
A lot.
So many.
So many?
What are we doing? I don't understand.
Okay, what is?
So you're redrawing the process of cellular respiration, but on this trifold.
So we're drawing that example inside.
It doesn't necessarily have to be that example, but you're not doing it 3 times. You're doing it 1 time,
Uh-huh.
right? But you want each stage or each step on each third of the paper, right? Or each fold. So when I close this fold here, and I'm just looking at this fold, all I want to see is glycolysis, right?
Or cytoplasm.
And this, like, so I want to see the cytoplasm, but all I want to see is the stage or the step of glycolysis,
So
right?
I
Was
can
it not
draw.
supposed to draw it?
When I open up this fold, okay, the middle fold, I just want to see the stage of the Krebs cycle. On this side, I just want to see the stage of electron transport chain. So this whole paper is going to have the whole process, right? So it's going to have your entire process, right? On this paper, you're going to start cytoplasm, mitochondria, step 1, step 2, step 3, right? So when you're opening up this paper, you're going to be able to see step 1, step 2, and then step 3. That way you can fold this to look at one step at a time when you need to, okay, to study that
Wait,
step.
so we draw like what's on there on here?
You don't have to draw this, this
Okay,
is just
but
an example.
I can draw that whole thing, but just make sure that glycolysis is something right here. I can do like that.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Mhm.
Oh.
So you want this whole page filled up with the process of cellular respiration.
Oh, so we're doing it sideways like this, right?
No, I want you doing it this way.
Oh my
What?
god.
That's Lord. I don't get it.
Why? Why don't you get it?
Because how are we gonna make it like long enough if it's this way?
Just draw a bigger mitochondria. So I know that this diagram is like that, right? But I want it to where, you know, you have glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron
Wait, also
transport.
for
If you feel better doing it like this, you can, just as long as you put it all in there. It doesn't have to be, there's not an exact
we
science
just
to
draw
it.
that green square.
Huh? Yeah. Yeah.
But is glycolysis a part of the cytoplasm? Or is that like?
Yeah, glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm. So all this white stuff is the cytoplasm. Glycolysis is occurring in the cytoplasm. Krebs and ETC are occurring in the mitochondria. Okay? So you're also gonna probably have to go back and look at your slides, right? To look at the inputs, the outputs, and the locations of each one of these steps. Okay? Any other questions?
Maybe
No?
later.
Maybe later? Okay, I'll be at my desk or I'll be walking around the class if you do have questions on this, okay? Don't overthink it, okay? Like I said, draw the whole process out, right? Or at least the background organelles, the cytoplasm, the mitochondria, right? And then start filling in the steps, glycolysis, Krebs, electron transport chain, and then start filling in the inputs and the outputs for each step, okay? That's pretty much it, okay? Make sure you draw it and make sure you color it, okay? Any other questions?
What are the 3 sections you need? Is cytoplasm, Krebs cycle, and mitochondria?
So cytoplasm and mitochondria are organelles, The three steps are glycolysis, Krebs, and electron transport.
Okay.
Okay? So each section needs one of those steps, but you want each step to come across the whole paper, right? So you want glycolysis, Krebs, electron transport chain, right? And on this entire paper, you have the cytoplasm and the mitochondria.
Oh. Wait, but isn't the mitochondria only on the Krebs cycle and the ATP?
Yeah, so that's why the mitochondria will be here, right, with Krebs and electron transport chain, and here we'll have glycolysis.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Okay? Any other questions? Okay, go ahead and get started on this.
Oh my god.
Okay.
Please.